All right. Welcome, everyone, to this episode of DoD Contract Academy. We are back with a returning guest. I think this is your third time, Corinne. Is that right?
I think this is my second time, but you've had some friends of the CMMC ecosystem on at different times.
Yeah, no, I definitely have. Man, I could have sworn this was your third time. We've certainly taken our past interviews and cut them up and plastered them across the social media sites and YouTube. I feel like I'm always seeing you pop up for giving some advice. And then, of course, everything you're doing, which is great on LinkedIn as well. So it's good to see you again.
It's great to see you again.
Now, I guess there's some big things happening. If people don't remember, you are the CMMC expert. You're the one I go to when I have CMMC questions, and whether we're talking about getting certified or going over your system, making sure everything's legit for government contracting. Why don't you give us an overview of just the specialty, and then we'll get into kind of what's happening currently and why this is a timely episode to put out there.
Absolutely. So, my name is Corinne Wise, and I am an assessor for the CMMC program with the Cyber AB and the DoD. And so, I will be one of the assessors that performs the third party assessments when the CMMC rule becomes final. And I'm also an implementer and a secure architect. So, we help companies get ready and we build secure enclaves in GCC High and Azure Gov, as well as deal with complex on prem situations that people are trying to tackle as they go down that road of getting compliant with NIST SP 800 171. And I guess that's a good place to recap is about the program in general and where it's at. So
Right.
we still meet DoD contractors that, you say CMC to them, or you even say 800 171 and they don't know what you're talking about. We can walk around trade shows or different really important DoD conferences, and people are largely unaware of this thing that is about to really have a huge effect on business that you want to do with the Department of Defense. And the CMMC rule is in its final phases. We actually expected it to come out about a week ago, and it didn't. So it will be out in the next 30 days. The DoD has definitely indicated that it's on its last leg of its journey before it hits the Federal Register or reginfo.gov. And once that happens and it's published to the public, it has a little less than a year or somewhere close to a year of red tape that it has to go through before we, as DoD contractors, and I didn't mention that part, I'm also a DoD contractor, before we see it show up to us as DFARS clauses in our contracts. We're all used to that huge section of our contract where we see those DFARS clauses. And these DFARS clauses have that are related to CMMC, the cybersecurity maturity model, have actually been there, and we've been required to be 800 compliant since December of 2017. Any contractor that has DFARS clause 252, 204, 7012, 7019, and 7020 is required to be compliant with NIST SP 800 171 if their contract exposes them to controlled unclassified information, or if they create controlled and classified information as a result of the product, good, or service that they're doing for the DoD. And so that's the short and skinny of it, is that people think CMMC is something new, but they don't realize that they've been required for a long time to be compliant with NIST SP 800 171 if they are dealing with controlled and classified information. And you and I have
Yeah.
seen this year.
Oh, we sure have. And this is probably a good place to just stop. And for those not familiar with CMMC or wondering what a DFARS clause is. So when you have a government contract, in particular with the Department of Defense, but you're going to have clauses in there that are basically these. If you're not familiar with the FAR, and most people aren't, and even the people that are, some of them wish they weren't, but thousands of pages of regulations and policies basically that govern how the government buys stuff, right? And so when contracting officers get into the mix and start putting something on contracting, they're going to put these FAR or DFARS clauses in. A lot of times it's just a number, right? And there might be a little bit of verbiage afterwards, but a lot of companies don't even know what they're signing up for with these clauses that are added to the contract. And you mentioned, and so you can look those up. You can go online and look at the DFARS, the FAR, and you can look up those numbers. But what Corinne is specifically talking about, what you're specifically talking about, is CMMC, which essentially, as I understand it, is the cybersecurity requirements that companies are now going to be beholden to. So when you talk about NIST 800 171, that's a document with a bunch of security things that you would have to look at. And you talked about CUI, which is controlled unclassified information. Do I have the acronym right?
Perfect. You are passing the test.
We've worked
God.
together. So let me just set. So obviously, you've been on the show before, and we both work in the government contracting space. I work more with clients that are selling to the government, but so we had an issue just a few months ago where one of my clients, who's been selling to the government forever, all of a sudden got an email from the contracting officer and said, it basically said, "Hey, I can't put." He already had a contract. I can't put another delivery order on this contract. It was a big contract unless you do your C self inspections, you get everything uploaded into SPRS, that you have a plan going forward. He didn't know what any of it meant. So he reached out to me. Of course, I reached out to you and we got him squared away really fast, by the way. So thank you for that. He's very grateful. Why don't we start there and maybe under the premise of, hey, even if you're not on a classified contract, this CUI that has been defined, this controlled unclassified information, that can exist and you might not even know it. It might be just combining a bunch of information that you have, right? Can you walk through that a little bit and then maybe we go
Yeah,
into SPRS?
and this example that you brought up is just such a perfect example of so many different things. And like you said, let's walk it back a little bit just to the basics. So the CUI program and this whole controlled unclassified information program is defined in Title 32 of the Code of Federal Regulation. That's what CFR stands for. And that's what we're waiting for some updates to with this rule. It's going to change some of the wording in that. And then we end up seeing the results of that. That CFR is actually written to executive branch agencies, not us, but it tells them you must flow all of this down to everyone else through contracts. And they do that through Title 48 of the CFR, which is FAR clauses and DFARS, or sorry, FAR and DFARS clauses. And the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation has three important clauses that affected your client that day. And it's really important that everyone listening who has a contract or who's going to win a future contract looks at these and understands the implication of them. It's huge and it's affecting everybody right now. So I'm just going to call it 7012, 7019, and 7020, but understand that they're really 252, 204, 7012, and then 252, 204, 7019, and then 7020.
No, but nobody's confused yet. So needless to say, you know what all of that means. And that's why I go to you whenever I have these
Right,
questions.
right. So they've got these three clauses and they want to understand what they're required to do, or they could actually land in false claims land. And I'm going to tie this back to your client, who he was not in false claims land, but it ends up affecting people that aren't expecting it. And if you don't understand how to deal with this type of information or how much it costs to deal with this information, you could accidentally mess up your pricing on a contract. So it's really important to understand these three clauses. So 7012 says a lot of things, but what it says for today, what we're talking about today, is that if you have a contract that has controlled and classified information, you have to be doing the 110 requirements that are listed in a document called NIST SP 800-171. And those 110 requirements are actually broken down even further into 320 objectives or checklist items that you really usually need someone to help you with to make sure you're doing all those things. And it really boils down to building a physical wall and a logical wall around data. And it's how you create what we call a covered system for sensitive data. So the DoD has to share sensitive data with a lot of people that it wants to do business with. And it's asked that they protect it using these 110 requirements that tell you how to protect the information. And so that 7012 clause is in your contract and it just says incorporated by reference. And that means that you don't really know what it says unless you go look it up. And it also means that if it changes tomorrow, and it says a lot more than just that you need to be compliant with 800-171, but if it changes tomorrow, you're still required to do whatever it says at any given time because it's incorporated by reference. And
I was going to say, could you give just an example of like maybe a couple of those controls? So maybe one thing that's simple and maybe something that's maybe a little more complex.
Absolutely. So there's 14 families and they range from everything from how you authorize people into your environment to how you train people and keep them trained for the roles that they have within your environment to things like separation of duties, where you make sure that no one person has too much power in your environment and could use that in a abusive way to gain access to data as an adversary or as an unauthorized person. So there's a lot of different protections in there. And those are kind of complex ones. And then there's a really straightforward physical domain that says, hey, you've got to have locks on your doors and a very secure physical boundary around this environment, and talks about things like, or has implications for things like security cameras and escorting visitors and all types of very tangible physical things. And then
Right.
there's another domain that talks about how to build a logical boundary around the data with things like with gateways and firewalls and networking devices, and how to build your rule sets on those devices and all types of things that can get pretty technical for the average person. So this has been a tall order for the DIB, and it's overwhelming them. They're just really taken aback and truly didn't seem to understand, a lot of them, that this is what they were signing up for when they got into the contract. So what I love about the example you brought up is sometimes people will sign a COTS contract, meaning they're selling something to the DoD that they sell every day commercially all over the world or all over the country. And so they say, oh, I can't have controlled and classified information. I'm just a COTS vendor to the DoD. I'm not even one of these complicated people that deals with sensitive data. I'm just a simple old COTS vendor. But that too can even get pretty tricky, as it did for our friend, where the government, in order to receive your COTS product, may share drawings or may put their part numbers on what you normally sell with a completely different part number. And that part number alone can be controlled and classified information. So the way that you figure out if you've got it, controlled and classified information, is with the NARA registry. So there's something called the NARA archives, and it's where all of the controlled and classified information definitions exist. That would be the hard way to go figure it out. The
Mhm.
more straightforward forward and simple way to do it is to go to your contracting officer, to go to your prime, and to hopefully figure this stuff out before you ever even get started, to know that I will be dealing with controlled and classified information um, of this type during this contract. Maybe it'll be ITAR or export controlled or controlled technical information, and that you're very clear of the type of work you're doing and when it will involve this type of information, or if you would ever be creating it. You should ask these questions from the start. Where is this going to happen? What type is it? And then that you would relate that to the contracts that you've won for any given cage code that you have. That's where you start. That's where you start with this whole thing, is figuring out when your company is exposed to controlled and classified information, because that part alone is catching a lot of people by surprise, even
Yeah.
COTS vendors.
Now, do you have to have those clauses in the contract to be responsible for the CMMC requirements?
I can tell you right now that almost everybody has those clauses in their contract. And even if they don't have controlled and classified information, it says if you do. So they put it in almost all contracts
Yeah.
as, and we found in that example, they were able to come back and say, hey, after all, it looks like you do have controlled and classified information, and you will need to, and here goes the next step, is that 7019 clause that says you must self-assess using 800-171 and see if you're doing the 110 requirements properly, and then calculate your score and put it up in the SPRS system, which is a supplier performance risk system.
Mhm.
And so 7019, these are active right now today. And that's why they came to our friend and said, hey, we noticed you don't have an SPRS score up in the SPRS system. This must be a mistake. We're going to go ahead and stop orders until you straighten that out. And we'll let us know when you've got it taken care of.
Right. So if you're a company then, and you probably have this clause in one of your contracts, I brought it up because even if it's for some reason not in there, I can imagine a lot of scenarios where you probably have this type of information or data. And if you're selling to the government, it's going to be, this is coming up. This is going to
Oh, yeah.
be a player. So is the first step then for someone that thinks or sees the clause in there that, hasn't done anything yet, is the first step start taking a look at the self-inspection checklist?
Absolutely. So we have, I'll go ahead and let us just say that every Friday I teach SPRS Friday. It's the Supplier Performance Risk System lesson where I tell contractors, it's free. You just come for an hour. We'll put it in the comments of this show. But you come for an hour and we just tell you this is the documents that you need to self-assess the 110 requirements and the 320 objectives. And this is how you calculate your score. And this is how you get into the SPRS system. If you have this type of information and you're not doing that now, then you're already not compliant.
Right.
And CMMC is really just an extension of all of this. What the DoD found is that those scores, those very scores that you and I are discussing, that they were wildly inaccurate. Where people were, the highest score is 110, the lowest score is actually negative 203. And they found that the average score a contractor was giving themselves was 56 or something like that. But
Mhm.
when they came out and did, that's the last thing I was going to say, is that they do their own assessments right now. Not that you don't have to wait for CMMC. They can call you any day and come and check things out because that's clause 7020. It says that they can. And when they did, when they went out and started checking, they found that the contractors on average gave themselves a 56 and their average, the DIPCAC, the DCMA, was 100 points below that, at least
Uh-huh.
on average. So it wasn't that people were being dishonest. It was really just a lack of understanding about how to properly self-assess, what tools to use,
Yeah.
and that type of thing.
I just had a conversation. I don't know if Michael Lejeune, but he was on here, and we were just talking about how, on one hand, the government says we want small businesses to sell to the government and we want to make it easier, especially in the face of a declining small business sector. Every year, it seems like fewer and fewer small businesses are selling to the government.
Right.
Yet they come up with these requirements that make it like a lot of companies throw their hand, even big companies are like, holy crap, am I supposed to really make $1 million investment in
Right.
putting these requirements in place? Now, I don't think it's that much for CMMC in some cases. I guess it really is, it depends on what you're doing. But, what kind of investment do people actually have to make in this, right? Is it something that they can do themselves? Do they have to hire somebody to do it? And then, if they do want help, who can they reach out to? Obviously, they can reach out to you. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the three PAOs and how many of them there are and what does it look like for a small business that's approaching this?
Right. So we said that right now you're required to do these self-assessments. And if you go to SPRS Friday or you look into how to do it yourself, and you're not even able to understand what those documents are saying and how to self assess, then you definitely need help so that you can get an accurate score. It's more important that it's accurate. You don't want to be in false claims land and you don't want to put something up there inflated like 110 when you're nowhere close. So that's the first thing. CMMC will not, that clause will be called 7021 and it will not show up in contracts for at least a year. And when it
Mm,
does, it will only show up in a few contracts at that first year. And then each year you'll see more and more contracts that just like a secret clearance or some type of facility clearance requirement, it'll be just like that. It'll say you can't win this work unless you are CMMC level 2 certified. When that time comes, your self-assessment will need to be accompanied every 3 years by a third-party assessment from a C3 PAO. So they'll come in and check to see where you're at on your 800-171 compliance, and you're gonna have to pay for it. So that's one of the first most obvious costs that this
mm,
program is gonna introduce to people. And it really will depend on the size of the organization. I think they're gonna range anywhere from right now, the price is a bit inflated because there's not that many C3 PAOs, and people are paying for early assessments, by the way. There's an early assessment program called the Joint Surveillance Voluntary Assessment Program, and companies are lining up in droves to get assessed early because they see it as a competitive advantage. And they're paying anywhere from 20,000 for the smallest companies up to, I don't even know what the upper, I would say probably somewhere near 80,000 or something like that for much larger companies. That would be a huge assessment
yeah.
uh, to pay that much. But it is a lot of work on the part of the C3PAO and their team. And they do a few week engagement. Only usually one of those weeks is live on site, and a lot of the other parts are looking through paperwork. So you can actually contact these C3PAOs and ask questions and learn what you need to do to get ready. And there's a lot of different ways to learn how to get ready, not just by reaching out and starting to interview C3PAOs for the future, but then figuring out what you need to do to get to the point that you could ever call one and actually be ready to be assessed, which takes about a year. And so for most companies, it's taking about a year to get all this together. We have something called scope. They may have to, because of the nature of their work, have their entire enterprise environment in scope because maybe they're a manufacturing environment or a warehouse environment and they have CUI everywhere all over the place, or some of them may choke it back to little tiny enclaves on-prem in their building, or they may have an enclave up in the cloud. They may be able to work a cloud-only atmosphere because of the way that they interact with the controlled and classified information. And so the reason I'm bringing that all up is the cost can vary depending on your scope and how far away you are from being 800-171 compliant. And then it can also vary just based on the way you interact with CUI. If you can put it all up in the cloud, although GCC High and Azure Gov are expensive, we build enclaves up there and support them and do all of the different compliance steps for people. And when you compare it to the cost of running an on-prem network, it's very similar. People think it's so expensive, but I don't think they're really thinking about how much it costs to run an on-prem network. And so people say, "Oh, this is going to be so expensive," but it is. But it's really important. It's an important expense when you think of the
Yeah.
loss to a breach or
Mhm.
to losing all of your DoD contracts because of some type of breach. And so, yeah, I'd say, okay, so the answer to your question is it really does depend. But I would say if they were trying to budget, let's say that the company that I just brought to a JSVA, they passed with a perfect 110. When I first met them a year ago, they had nothing except for a GCC High license, and that was it. And they were as far away from compliance as most people are. They had a good attitude and they were trying to do things right,
Mhm.
but they didn't know a lot of the details of how to get this done. Uh,
Right.
and they spent an enclave to build it can cost around $20,000 to get it going. But then after that, you're going to need policies and procedures to match the implementation
Right.
of the technical and the personnel and all of the training and everything. You could be looking at a lot of additional expenses beyond just setting something up. It's all of the getting the program strong. And for it to truly be a program means it's repeatable and that it could be carried out by almost anybody and
Right.
all those elements.
Yeah. A lot of companies, especially when they grow in size, if they're anything related to things like software and data and all of that, a lot of times they'll have someone dedicated to cybersecurity. So I think that person being aware of this and knowing how to operate in that environment is a good thing. I know that when we worked with our client and got him squared away, you also set him up with a system that could manage this for him. So it wasn't all going to hit them over the head every time there's going to be an inspection. So it's just like probably like running a business and you might be using QuickBooks or a bookkeeper to help with all of your expenses, make it because when it comes tax time, if you haven't been doing that, keeping up with it, filing for taxes. I know my first year in business, I wasn't prepared for how much work that was. And then I made my investments for finance. I bring this up just to maybe put this in a category people could understand. Running a business makes insane sense to have something like QuickBooks and a bookkeeper doing that all the way along. So when it comes time to file your taxes, everything's ready to go. I think cybersecurity is, especially as things get more complex, it's turning into the same thing. And especially if you're just starting out, I think hearing this, talking to you, maybe attending your Friday events and making yourself aware of what is required from the outset is going to make it a lot easier as you move forward instead of just getting caught off guard and now having to figure out what you're going to do. With the client of mine that we worked with, it was no brainer. Even though it's an investment, it was a no brainer because if you have a couple $1,000,000 in contracts with the government, that's worth a hell of a lot more than the investment of the time it's going to take. And then, of course, then you do have a competitive advantage right now, I would say. If you are,
Absolutely. The
yeah,
the second we got done with that JSVA, the reaction from primes towards the client was immediate. The primes know that they need people who are going to be able to do this. And you don't want everyone around you that's in your same NAICS codes to be all squared away and you're not. And DFARS clauses start getting worked into contracts and you can't even win.
yeah,
And you have to, the other thing that you and I saw this year is we had another friend our customer who, the FedRAMP implications for who we use as our cloud service providers. So if you're putting data anywhere that's not on your property, it's being hosted elsewhere. The cloud isn't really just a cloud up in the sky, right? A cloud is just, and people say it, I love it when they say it, it's just computers somewhere else.
hmm,
It's someone else is hosting other people's data side by side in a multi-tenant environment. And they are now needing to be FedRAMP if you're going to be putting controlled and classified information into those environments. And it could be software as a service, it could be Salesforce, it could be all types of products that we're used to using on a daily
yeah,
basis. And we take for granted that we're putting the government CUI up in that cloud, and it's going to have to be FedRAMP equivalent based on 7012 and what
oh
it's
yeah, no, that's huge. FedRAMP is just another one of those things where a lot of people are resisting it, but I'm seeing it in a ton of solicitations as a requirement. And also the people in the government aren't all rocket scientists. There are some rocket scientists, but most of them aren't. And just, I could speak as a former program manager. I had a very loose understanding about what some of the requirements were. I just knew that I needed them. And I get it now when I'm talking with people on the other side of the aisle. They'll say, hey, we need FedRAMP. They might not even completely understand what that means, but they just know that if you don't have it, they don't even want to talk to you because their boss told them that's a requirement. So you can make excuses and talk about your security and everything else. For that person you're talking to, if in their mind you need FedRAMP or you need CMMC and you don't have it, then you've already been dismissed. And that's part of why this competitive advantage thing is in place. So right, wrong, or indifferent, it is going to give you a competitive advantage, and it's going to be something you can use in your marketing as well.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right.
No, that's awesome. Okay. So I've got just a couple more questions. We're going to wrap it up shortly here, but just one is, so like right now, if I had this clause, which you said most people probably do, and I suspect I have CUI, I can go out, I can go to your Friday events, I can look at the SPRS checklist, we can do a self-assessment, maybe hire someone to help us with that, maybe not, depending. We can input that score into SPRS. What you've told me in the past is, hey, you don't have to be passing with that score necessarily. They want to see that you've done it and that you have these policies and everything in place to get to healthy. My question is, when CMMC goes into law, first of all, tell me that something's going into effect here in a week or so. How does that increase my requirement when that goes into effect? And then what does it mean when CMMC goes into effect? Does one of those mean that I have to have a score above a certain number on that in SPRS or an assessment in order
Yeah.
to be on contract? Or what does that exactly do?
These are such perfect questions that you just asked. I'm so glad we didn't get off of here without the exact questions that most people have. And in a week, all that's going to happen is that for the first time ever, we're going to get a glance at the official published CMMC documentation, the changes to the Code of Federal Regulation, and what this DFARS clause 252, 204, 7021 is going to look like. So those of us that are like somebody like me, we're excited just to see what it's going to say, but
Gotcha.
it won't go into effect for about another year. We expect to start seeing it in early 2025, where this goes into some contracts, and we don't know which ones. And you don't want to gamble with, is it going to be in the one that you want to bid on? And it takes at least a year to get ready. So the first thing is start, just because I'm saying this isn't going to show up in contracts for another year, start now. And the second part of that question was, today, there is no minimum score that you have to have. We have entered a negative 150, and then immediately the government started orders again. The person didn't have an SPRS score. The government stopped orders because they have to. Under that clause that ends in 7019, they have to have that score up there if they have controlled and classified information. So once they put that negative 150 up there, which is a horrible score, but it's honest, they
Mhm.
satisfy the requirement as it sits right now, which is just have one up there. But when CMMC comes, there will be a minimum score. And in order to get the level 2 certification, which allows you to win a contract with that clause. And we're expecting that minimum score to be around at 80%, and that you will be able to fix certain types of problems with your implementation through the POANM process. And we're really excited to see the details of exactly, is it 80%? Which items of these 110 might be eligible for problems that can be fixed. And there'll be things like what we call an interim level 2 certification if you are in that window where you're almost passing, but you need to fix a few things. And it'll last about 180 days. And if you can fix them within that short time frame, it turns into an official level 2 certification. This is futuristic that I'm talking about, and you will be able to bid during that time that you have that interim, as long as you get to that minimum passing score during your level 2 assessment.
Gotcha.
And the
Yeah.
assessments aren't easy. That's the last thing I want to say is, as an assessor I've been on these JSBAs as an assessor with the DIBCAC DCMA. And right now the assessor has to go through the 320 items that we discussed, and there's no getting around that because they have to sign their name and say, I found this evidence. The company provides their evidence that they're doing these things. And it has to, number one, cover the scope of their environment. And number two, be the right kind of evidence. And so the assessments are thorough. So if you think it's going to be anything like a SOC 2 or ISO or anything else you've ever been through, it is not. It is nothing like that. You have to really look at those objectives and satisfy all of them, or you're going to be number one, you probably won't even be able to get an assessment because normally the C3PAO would turn you away. But I just want to tell people that it is something that they want to take seriously and
Yeah.
start ready for now.
Okay. No, that is awesome. And it's great advice. So it sounds to me like, if I understand everything correctly, that everyone's on notice right now, right? So in a week, you're not going to be required to have a 53 or whatever that score is going to be. In a week, we might find out what that score is going to be. But in about a year, when that gets cemented, then there is going to be a score associated with it, and you're going to have to meet it if that requirement is associated with a contract you're on or that you're going after. So
It'll most likely be at 88 will be the most likely.
88. Okay. Is that your bet? So if it's above that, is it like The Price is Right? I can bet above that and we can bet drinks or whatever on that.
If you can get to 88 out of 110, you'll probably make it through.
Yeah, that sounds, considering you can be like negative 150, I think you were saying. It sounds like a pretty good score to me. No, that is awesome. Okay, so what's the best way to reach you? So if someone's listening to this, hey, I need to talk to Corinne and figure out what I'm going to do here. Where can they go?
Great. So our website is WTInetworks.com, and that's networks with an S. One of the most important things you could ever do on my website is sign up for the certified CMMC professional class. People think that is there for assessors to get ready to be an assessor for CMMC, but it's turned out to be the cheapest way for any company to get ready for the CMMC program. It is the best investment ever. It'll save you money on consultants, on being able to do half of the work yourself, and it's worth the 5 days all day long. Everybody who takes it says that. So we're a licensed training provider for that, and that is something I would really consider sending somebody on your IT staff, your compliance person, send somebody through that at WTInetworks.com. And then hopefully we'll put in the chat the links to my site where you can find me. You can find me on LinkedIn, Corinne Wise.
Mhm.
And hopefully we'll put a link to that SPRS Friday, which we get a really good turnout for that. And it just helps folks get at least their SPRS score up there into the SPRS system the right way.
Awesome. That sounds good. We'll definitely put all those links into the show notes, and we'll put this out on YouTube most likely too. So people will be able to get it in a couple different ways. Corinne, as usual, thanks for coming in and helping to save everybody here. And I can personally vouch for the work that you've done because, like I said, we've worked together with that one client, and he was under short notice. And I want to say within a week or so, we were squared away and then we had systems in place. That was awesome work. And I highly recommend you to anyone that's listening right now to help them figure this out.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today. And thank you for helping me spread the word so that everybody can keep bidding and winning.
All right. Sounds good. All right, everyone. That was Corinne here talking about CMMC and the DoD Contract Academy. Check out the show notes, find the links, go attend her Friday briefing buyer course, do what you have to do to get right here so you can start winning more contracts. And we'll see you next time.